Hi everyone, I'm here today to bring you my top 10 tips for how to study Japanese. As you may or may not know, I've been living in Japan for 7.5, I guess nearly going on 8 years, and I studied Japanese for 3 years before that, so now, ちょっと何も用意してないけど日本語を簡単に喋れるようになったから今まで学んできたことを皆さんにぜひシェアして教えたいと思います。I'm still far from perfect, but I did spend a lot of time working on my Japanese, and I don't want that time to go to waste, so I want to share to you everything I've learned along my Japanese learning journey. So here are my top 10 tips. Let's go. Tip number 1. Okay. These tips are all going to be, first of all, very general, and they're in no particular order, so I'm just going to list them off one by one, but here we go. First tip, keep having fun. This is something I've noticed not just across Japanese language study, but all kinds of language studies. You have two kinds of people in this world. Some people who will always struggle to learn language, and some people who, might have an easier time. It might take a lot of time, but they'll eventually be able to learn language. I think one big key differentiator between these two groups of people is whether you like learning languages or not. If there's a language you're interested in, passionate about, want to spend the time to learn it, not just necessarily because of work or because of, life circumstances, but because you actually like the language, you like studying it, you enjoy the time you spend, learning with it, because it can be kind of tedious, studying all this vocab, studying all this grammar points and everything. If you don't enjoy it from the get-go, you will have a much harder time studying language. That's tip number 1. Next, do your best, of course, to get immersed. You might have heard these tips 1,000 times already, but there's a reason for them. The first 3 years I spent studying Japanese was at college at UCLA, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, but man, it was hard to keep up sometimes. Just because if you've tried studying Japanese before, you know how hard it can be with all the, the hiragana, the katakana, the kanji, and just how the sentences' grammatical structures work so differently than in English. It can be really hard to wrap your head around, I'm not gonna lie. But doing that, I gotta say, I felt like after my first year, even after my second year, I was falling a bit farther and farther behind in my Japanese classes. And you may have had that feeling before, but if you're taking a Japanese class or another language class and you start falling behind, it becomes harder and harder to catch up because it becomes harder and harder to, keep up with what the professor is saying. So not only are you farther behind on old materials, you're really struggling now to even understand what the teacher is trying to teach you for new materials. And so my point is that trying to get yourself immersed, as in, for example, visiting Japan or surrounding yourself with as many native Japanese materials as you can, whether you enjoy watching anime, whether you like reading manga, whether you have Japanese friends you can talk to, whether it's Japanese YouTube content that you can consume. Do whatever you can to surround yourself with as much Japanese content as possible, and that'll help you so much. After I first visited Japan, even the second time, every time I came back from visiting Japan, my Japanese just got so much better, and it allowed me to catch up to the current level of my Japanese class and keep up with the course material. Very important. 3, I cannot emphasize this enough, just start doing something. Start learning. If you're interested in learning Japanese, go for it. I feel like a trap that many people often fall into is they spend half the time they're supposed to be spending on studying Japanese on studying different ways or on trying to find out the most time-effective, brain-effective way of studying Japanese. Look, before you start your Japanese learning journey, you will need to spend a little bit of time on seeing what textbooks to use. What podcast can I listen to? Whose YouTube should I watch to help me study Japanese? What material should I use? All these kinds of things. You'll have many questions, and it's important to, watch a few YouTube videos on how to best learn Japanese. There's a ton of great resources out there. I want to maybe put some of those videos out myself in the near future, but the important thing is to not get stuck up in that loop of, am I really doing the right thing? Am I really studying the right stuff right now? Am I using the right materials or the optimal materials? Don't get stuck in that loop and just pick a textbook, pick a podcast, and just start learning. That's it. My next tip would be don't skip out on the kanji. Look, I understand kanji can be really hard. I struggled with it a lot myself. I have thought to myself so many times as well, maybe if I just don't learn the kanji and just learn the rest of Japanese, maybe it'll be a lot easier that way. I mean, who uses kanji anyways anymore? I've recently been tutoring a friend as well who had the same doubts about learning kanji. But I have to say, even though learning kanji can be hard, and while you don't necessarily need to be able to write kanji, I think it's so important to at least spend some time learning the basic kanjis. And why? Because you may not realize this now, but just kanji is so interrelated to the Japanese language that it'll help you on your Japanese learning journey. I know I'm not explaining this really well, but for example, say this. In English, if you hear a new word that has the root aqua, for example, like aquamarine or hydro something, hydrophobic, for example, you may not know what that word means without having studied it before, but you know that, oh, a word with the root aqua or hydra must have something to do with water. It's the same thing with kanji. If you don't know the roots at all, if you skip out on studying the kanji completely, you will be lacking a lot of context that could help you learn and retain new information much more easily along the course of your Japanese studies. Don't skip out on the kanji. Next, I would say, manage your study time into bite-sized chunks. I understand it can be super exciting to start learning a new language, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to be able to talk with new people you've never been able to speak with before. But that leads to sometimes some people wanting to be like, okay, I'm gonna study Japanese, I'm gonna study 5 hours every day, do some 1 hour reading, 1 hour of speaking, 1 hour of watching the materials, 1 hour of this, 1 hour of that. That's great if you can keep up with it. The reality is most of us, even people who like to study, who have the mental capacity to study more, have a really hard time keeping up with that much study time. It's much better, I think, to do, okay, maybe not 5 minutes, but 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour a day, or an hour every other day, studying whatever languages you want to learn, instead of trying to say, okay, I'm gonna study 5 hours a day, and keeping that up for 3 days, but then, giving up at the end of the third day because it's just impossible to maintain. Just like working out, right? You want to keep everything perfect, but that eventually, if that stops you from learning the language itself or stops you from working out, then don't do it. Break up your studying into bite-sized chunks, make it more manageable, and take it one step at a time. Next tip, I know this is all over the place, but make sure to practice what you've learned, okay? It's really important to just reinforce all the new knowledge you've learned. So let's say you learn a new word, let's say you studied a vocab list of 10 new words. Great, you know 10 new words now. The thing is that you will forget those words really quickly, or no matter how often you study them, it means nothing if you're not able to use them in a sentence, right? So what I often did is whenever a friend teaches me a new word, I immediately try to force that word into whatever sentence I'm trying to say, not just once, not just twice, but 3 times, just along the course of my conversation with my friend, or I try to make an example sentence with it. I feel like that helps get you a long way to, actually remembering that word and being able to use it fluently in conversation. Practice what you've learned. Actually try to use what you've learned. Don't just keep it somewhere in the brain memory. Maybe 2 more tips. One thing, just remember, languages are not just words. Languages are, this incredible combination of course, words, grammar points, sounds, but also culture and people and history. Languages are continuously evolving, even as we speak right now. They come to be the way they are because of the history of the people that spoke it, or because of different cultural customs. You might phrase things a certain way in English, but that may be phrased totally differently in Japanese. Basically, I don't want to get off on too huge a tangent, but just remember that languages are almost these living, breathing things that evolve. And so what I mean to say by that is, if you're gonna study Japanese, don't just try to study vocab, don't just try to study kanji, don't just try to study listening or whatever. Remember that there are lots of moving parts. There are lots of different elements that you will need to eventually be familiar with in order to speak the language. And so, just as well, anytime that you can spend speaking to Japanese people or learning about Japanese culture and learning about different words associated with different culturally significant things, all of that will go a long way as well into helping you really get into Japanese and really be able to study it more naturally. And yeah, it's just kind of hard to explain the benefits of that, but just remember that languages are not just a single thing. It's like this huge collection of, it's like your health, right? No single thing is gonna make you healthy. Your health is a combination of physical fitness, appropriate sleep, what you eat, do you get enough sun? It's this huge combination of things. So just remember that languages are the same. Right, moving on to my last tip. Yep, I would say get this app, okay? There's this app on my phone called Shirabejisho. I'll post it right here. I love this app. This app, it's basically a simple dictionary app, but there's actually so much functionality. It's so simple, and best of all, it's free. If there's a word you don't know in Japanese, you can look it up in English, it'll give you the Japanese for it. You can look up the word in Japanese, it'll give you the English for it. You can draw the character if you don't know what that word means, and then it'll give you everything. It gives you how to read that word, it gives you different example sentences for that word, it gives you all the kanji involved in that word. And then what I really like is that you can actually bookmark some of your favorite words, organize them into different folders, and then study those folders as flashcards, even with spaced repetition. I've never really used Anki, or I've never been a really big fan of, rote memorizing huge vocab lists. I've always been a fan of learning languages more organically, and so that's what I've done with Japanese, and that's what I plan to do, and what I am doing right now with my Chinese studies. But I find that instead of using Anki to memorize crazy vocab lists of words you've never used before, you've never heard before, instead, use this Shirabejisho app to mark down words you've heard in conversations with your friends, or that you've heard in this anime you're watching, or whatever it is. Bookmark that and then study that later. And since it's a word you've learned naturally, through naturally hearing it, studying that after the fact will reinforce that even more, and that'll make it so much easier to learn that word and remember it and be able to use it in the future as well. I think that gives you a much higher quality of studying than just brute forcing your way through thousands of different characters in Anki. Okay, little bonus tip. This might be obvious to a lot of you, but again, be patient. Japanese is said to be one of the hardest languages for an English native speaker to learn, and I find that's pretty true. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean you can't do it. It just takes a lot of time, and so you need to be patient. You need to not be questioning what you're doing every single day, and really trust the process. Get your study program, get on it, study in bite-sized chunks, manageable pieces, and before you know it, you'll look back 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, and man, it'll be slow but steady progress, and you'll be proud of how far you've come. That I can promise you. It's easy to forget just how fun learning languages, but sometimes I spend some time and think back like, wow, I remember when I could only speak this amount of Japanese, or wow, I remember when I still struggled with this kind of Japanese, and it feels really good to just take a step back after a certain amount of time studying and just appreciate how far you've come. Looking back, you'll know it was all worth it. So with that, those are my top 10 or 11 tips, or I don't even know what I told you, just some random thoughts that helped me really dial in my Japanese and stay on top of my Japanese studies and get me to where I am today, where I work most days almost purely in Japanese. It was always my goal to reach more than just conversational levels. So maybe you just want to be able to speak enough Japanese so you can have fun with friends or when you visit Japan, and that's all great. But no matter how far you've come, I'm sure you'll have a great time studying Japanese, and I really recommend it if it's anything at all that you're interested in. Learning a language can change your life. So with that, don't forget to like, subscribe, maybe hit that bell notification icon if this was of any value to you whatsoever, and we'll see you guys again next time. Thanks for watching. Oh, hi.
Hi. Thank you for watching.